There are moments in science when silence feels louder than discovery. When the universe doesn't shout its secrets, it whispers them softly in the rhythm of light. And if you listen long enough, those whispers begin to sound almost alive. Welcome to Science Reshaped, where data becomes discovery and numbers begin to feel like emotion. If you love stories that bridge science, mystery, and wonder, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear might change the way you look at the night sky forever. It began quietly. A new interstellar object had been spotted on the edge of our solar system, moving along the ecliptic line like a silent traveler from far beyond. The name was simple: 3I Atlas, the third interstellar visitor ever observed. Just a fragment of rock and ice drifting toward the sun, they said. A leftover piece of some ancient collision in another system. Nothing new, nothing special. But sometimes the most ordinary things are the ones that rewrite everything we know. At first, the data looked clean. The object was dim, distant, and slow, exactly what astronomers expected. Its orbit was plotted, its mass estimated, its path simulated through computer models. Everything pointed toward a predictable outcome: a bright flare as it approached the sun, then a slow fade into darkness. A routine observation like hundreds before. But the universe, as always, had other plans. The first anomaly came from Chile. A team noticed that the light curve, the graph tracking its brightness, didn't behave normally. Instead of brightening steadily as sunlight struck its icy surface, the light began to pulse, tiny rhythmic flickers. At first, they assumed equipment error. Maybe clouds, maybe interference. But when the same pattern appeared in data from Hawaii and again in Japan, it could no longer be ignored. The pulses were identical down to the millisecond. A heartbeat across space. No natural comet behaves like that. Jets of gas can flicker, sure, but never with such precision. This was something else, something structured. The scientists were cautious. They blamed coincidence, statistical noise, overlapping readings, anything but intention. Because intention would mean intelligence, and intelligence would mean we weren't alone in the data. Weeks passed. The pattern didn't vanish. In fact, it became stronger. The pulse grew faster, sharper, more deliberate. At Mauna Kea Observatory, a researcher noticed that the frequency wasn't random. It was accelerating, like a signal adjusting itself, fine-tuning. He stared at the numbers, heart racing, as if the object itself was aware of being watched. It was impossible, yet there it was, flashing back in perfect intervals. For the first time, silence in the control room felt alive. Theories began pouring in. Some said the comet's surface was rotating unevenly, creating a strobe-like reflection. Others suggested it was fragments tumbling through sunlight, producing rhythmic shadows. But the deeper they studied, the less sense it made. Every reflection angle, every thermal simulation, every gravitational model failed. The pulses followed no orbital logic, no spin pattern, no natural cause. It was as though something inside the object was choosing when to shine and when to hide. Then came the sunlight test, the moment everyone had been waiting for. When a comet nears the sun, frozen gases burst free and light explodes outward. But when 3I Atlas reached that point, it dimmed. Instead of shining brighter, it faded, as if withdrawing from the spotlight. That single reading broke every model. A comet that hides in sunlight is a comet that doesn't want to be seen. And that realization sent a chill deeper than any vacuum could. Infrared sensors confirmed another impossibility. Its temperature dropped when sunlight hit it, and rose again when it slipped into shadow. The object was regulating itself, almost like it was responding to the heat. Machines regulate, organisms adapt. Rocks do neither. For the first time, the word artificial appeared quietly in research notes, hidden behind layers of cautious language. Thermally reactive, self-adjusting surface. But the meaning was the same. This wasn't behaving like a comet. It was behaving like something designed. While most of the world carried on unaware, a few researchers became obsessed. They called it the waiting sky, because that's all they could do. Wait, watch, wonder. Every night, more data streamed in, and every night the pattern grew clearer. A pulse with intention, a rhythm with memory. Humanity had built telescopes to study the cosmos, but now the cosmos seemed to be studying us back. At a small research lab, a graduate student named Noor began analyzing the intervals between the flashes. She wasn't trying to prove anything, just to find consistency. But when she ran the sequence through her program, her hands froze on the keyboard. The intervals repeated every 47 cycles. 47, a prime number. No natural phenomenon repeats in prime intervals. It's too specific, too logical, too purposeful. In mathematics, prime numbers are often used to signal intelligence, to prove that something knows what numbers mean. Noor leaned back, staring at the glowing pattern on her screen, realizing she might be staring at the first intentional message humanity had ever received. She stayed silent that night, didn't report it, didn't post it, because how do you tell the world that a rock from another star might be speaking? Not in words, but in light. The next evening, she shared her findings with her mentor. He dismissed it immediately. Coincidence, he said, forcing a nervous laugh. But Noor noticed his hands trembling. Even he knew this was something else. When the data leaked weeks later, it didn't go viral. There were no screaming headlines or alien theories, just a quiet publication. Anomalous photometric behavior in interstellar object 3I Atlas. A few science blogs picked it up, then moved on. But in the small, silent corners of astrophysics forums, whispers began. A self-regulating object, a light sequence in primes, temperature inversion. The details didn't add up. And that meant only one thing. There was more to the story. By the time summer came, 3I Atlas had already started shifting its trajectory. Not by much, just a few fractions of a degree, but enough to confuse orbital models again. If it were just gravity, the path would be clean, predictable. But this one corrected itself, as though steering, adjusting, deciding. Some called it nonsense, others called it a miracle. But for those who watched closely, one feeling began to take hold, a quiet, creeping awe. Because deep inside that faint shimmer, somewhere across the cold gulf of millions of kilometers, something had chosen to move differently. Something had rewritten the rules of perihelion physics. And as 3I Atlas continued its silent approach, one haunting question remained. What kind of traveler changes its own pulse mid-journey? The waiting sky was no longer waiting. It was listening, and whatever 3I Atlas truly was, it was listening too. There are moments when silence doesn't mean absence. It means waiting. A pause before revelation, a breath before truth. That was the kind of silence surrounding 3I Atlas now. The kind that doesn't rest, it listens. The first pulse had been written off as a fluke, the second as an instrument glitch. But the third broke the pattern of denial, because it was the same length, the same brightness, and it came exactly when the data predicted it wouldn't. That was the moment when the watching turned into wondering. The rhythm was steady, 6 seconds between each flare. Then, after 20 minutes, it changed. 5.9, then 5.8. Subtle, almost invisible, but enough to show intent. The object wasn't just moving, it was modulating, like someone tapping their fingers on the edge of infinity. Faster and faster, as if impatient. At the International Data Array in Japan, Dr. Riku Sato stared at the readout long after everyone else had gone home. The pulses were too clean, too deliberate. He knew natural bodies flicker, surfaces spin, ice vents burst, light scatters. But this wasn't scattering, it was signaling. Each flare followed the same intensity curve, a sharp rise, a slow decay, then silence. Perfect symmetry. He adjusted for distance, calculated brightness loss, atmospheric distortion, and still the pattern held. Riku leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, "It's counting." Meanwhile, in Chile, another team began cross-checking timestamps from multiple observatories. They expected tiny differences due to local timing errors, but what they found chilled them. Every recorded pulse arrived at the exact same universal time, down to the millisecond. The signal was synchronized. That shouldn't be possible for reflected sunlight. It was as if the source itself was transmitting in a universal rhythm, ignoring distance and delay, speaking in a language only the cosmos could hear. Emails began circulating quietly between observatories, cautious, coded, and fearful. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone felt it. This wasn't just reflection, this was response. As the days passed, the light pattern began to evolve. The clean, uniform spacing shifted into groups, pairs and triplets separated by long pauses. Someone ran the numbers and froze. The intervals weren't random. They matched prime number sequences, the mathematical fingerprint of intelligence. 2 flashes, pause. 3 flashes, pause. 5, 7, 11. A scientist in Spain made the connection first. "It's communicating in primes," he whispered. But no one replied, because if that was true, then this object wasn't just traveling through our solar system. It was talking. That meant one of two things. Either the object was emitting energy, or it was storing it. Imani stared at the thermal data for hours, rerunning it again and again. Each time the same result. The object's surface temperature rose and fell in perfect sync with the light, like a machine charging and discharging in cycles. When she presented her findings, the room fell into silence. Then one of the older scientists leaned forward and said quietly, "If it's a machine, who built it?" No one answered. As 3I Atlas moved closer to the sun, the pulses intensified. They weren't random anymore. They were structured. Groups of short and long bursts forming a repeating signature. Mathematicians began plotting the sequence on time intensity charts and noticed something impossible. Every sixth sequence mirrored the one before it in reverse, a palindrome. The light was mirroring itself. Nature doesn't mirror. Entropy doesn't repeat backwards, but design does. When plotted visually, the pattern resembled a binary wave, peaks and troughs aligned like digital code. Engineers began running the light data through simple binary translators. The results were inconsistent, incomplete, but haunting. Among the noise, one clear binary value emerged again and again, 10 1 10 10. In binary, that's 42. The number that has followed human culture through myth, literature and science, the so-called answer to everything. Coincidence? Maybe. But even coincidence can feel like intention when the universe starts whispering in familiar numbers. By the second month, observatories began noticing a secondary signal, not in visible light, but in radio frequencies. Bursts of faint static aligned with each optical pulse, like an echo in another spectrum. At first they thought it was Earth-based interference, but the delay between optical and radio emission matched the exact distance between the object and the detectors. It wasn't an echo, it was layered communication, light for the eyes, frequency for the ears. Somewhere between brightness and silence, 3I Atlas had found a way to speak. Governments got involved, funding increased overnight. Certain data streams went dark. The few scientists who still had access to live telemetry were told to focus on optical decay patterns. But they knew what that meant. Ignore the pulse, they didn't. Nor, the young researcher who had first noticed the prime sequence months earlier began storing private backups of each day's readings. She noticed something new, a long silence every 12 hours, a pause in the signal. But when the light returned, the sequence that followed wasn't random continuation. It acknowledged the break. It was as if the object was recalibrating, waiting for feedback that never came. She tried overlaying the new pulses on top of human radio transmissions, faint pings sent from deep space antennas. When she aligned the timing, something extraordinary appeared. The next light pattern shifted slightly, as if replying. It was subtle, a delay of less than a second, but it was there. It was the first hint that 3I Atlas might not just be emitting, it was listening. Then came the blackout. On June 8th, 02, our UTC, all optical monitoring of 3I Atlas was suddenly suspended under the guise of sensor recalibration. Every public feed froze at the same frame, a bright flare expanding far beyond expected luminosity. For 3 days, there were no updates, no transmissions, no images, just silence. When the feeds came back online, the object's brightness had normalized, but the pulse was gone. Scientists who had tracked it from the beginning described a strange emptiness in the data, as if a voice had gone quiet mid-sentence. Some assumed it was over, that whatever mechanism caused the anomaly had burned out near the sun. But not everyone believed that. 3 weeks later, at an observatory in the Canary Islands, the pulse returned, fainter, slower, more distant, but the pattern was unmistakable. The same sequence, the same primes, only this time there was something new, a faint modulation embedded within the light, a wobble in the signal, too low to detect without specialized equipment. When amplified, the modulation revealed a repeating signature that matched human radar emissions from the 1970s Pioneer probes. Somehow, impossibly, 3I Atlas was replaying our own transmissions back to us. The world never heard that part of the story. It stayed buried in encrypted archives, shared only among a handful of scientists who didn't sleep much anymore, because they had begun to understand what the pulse really was. It wasn't a message being sent to us. It was a message passing through us. We were never the intended recipients. We were just in the way, As the object neared perihelion, it flared once more, a single blinding pulse that overwhelmed every sensor on Earth for exactly 1.6 seconds. Then it vanished behind the sun. No one could track it after that. No reflection, no signal, no trace, and yet, deep in the static of old recordings, in the noise that most systems filter out automatically, a faint rhythmic echo remained, weaker, slower, but undeniably there. A heartbeat in the dark. Atlas was still pulsing, still alive, still counting, and somewhere in that rhythm, hidden between the seconds, was the question that no one wanted to ask. Was it waiting for us to answer? When something glows in space, it's supposed to follow the rules. Light, heat, radiation, they all obey physics. But 3I Atlas didn't. It broke every rule we thought was unbreakable. After the pulse came the heat, or rather, the lack of it. When the object neared the sun, scientists expected the usual thermal spike. Every comet does it. Frozen gases ignite, ice boils off, tails form and stretch for millions of kilometers. That's the dance of a comet near perihelion. But 3I Atlas refused to dance. Infrared sensors first picked up the anomaly from NASA's Solar Dynamics network. Instead of warming, the object cooled. The closer it came to the sun, the lower its surface temperature fell. A slow, deliberate decline, as though it were shielding itself. Dr. Imani Ward, who had been awake for 30 hours straight at Mauna Kea, thought the numbers were flipped. She recalibrated the instruments, reset the thermal algorithms, and rechecked her logs. Same result. The readings were correct. Impossibly correct. She leaned closer to the monitor, eyes tired but wide. "It's cooling itself," she whispered. The words sounded absurd the moment they left her mouth. Yet there they were, written in photons and math. For 3 days, she didn't sleep. She kept comparing readings, sunlight exposure, albedo, angular velocity, everything. The physics just didn't add up. No natural object can defy radiative heating that way. Even metallic asteroids absorb and emit predictable energy. But this one didn't emit anything it didn't want to. Somewhere inside that small, distant speck, something was controlling heat. At first, the team thought it might be a reflective coating, an extremely smooth surface bouncing sunlight away. But spectrometry disproved it. The reflection wasn't uniform. It shifted over time, changing its reflectivity angle by fractions of a degree. It wasn't just reflecting light, it was deciding how much to reflect. That realization hit the room like a wave, because deciding implies choice, and choice implies control. 2 weeks later, data from the European Infrared Observatory confirmed the impossible trend. During daylight exposure, 3I Atlas absorbed less heat, but during darkness, when it should have cooled rapidly, it warmed up again. The graph looked like a heartbeat, heat rising in shadow, falling in sunlight, like respiration. Like life. Dr. Ward shared her findings through a private channel with her counterpart in Japan, Dr. Sato. He didn't respond for hours. When he finally did, his message was short. "We're seeing the same thing." They both knew what that meant. Independent confirmation. No error, no glitch, no atmospheric distortion. It was real. Soon, a small circle of scientists from different continents formed a hidden network, exchanging encrypted data, running simulations, chasing answers they couldn't publish, because no journal would accept what they were finding. Thermal inversion behavior, inconsistent with known materials. That's how they described it in code. What they meant was, the object regulates temperature like a living organism, or a machine designed to survive the sun. At the same time, something else began to shift, its rotation. As 3I Atlas neared perihelion, its spin rate slowed. Normally, the sun's radiation forces comets to tumble faster, but this one decelerated smoothly, as if applying invisible brakes. Some suggested it was sublimation control, outgassing from specific vents counteracting torque, but the thermal data didn't support that. There were no jets, no dust trails, nothing leaving the surface. The object wasn't reacting to sunlight, it was adapting to it. When they plotted its motion across the ecliptic, the numbers showed a strange deviation. It wasn't simply following gravity, it was correcting course. Small, incremental adjustments every few hours, like a spacecraft making mid-flight burns. The realization was terrifying. Something was guiding it. At Mission Command, analysts began whispering behind closed doors. Was 3I Atlas artificial? Could it be an ancient probe, drifting through space for eons, waking only near stars to recharge? They didn't say it publicly. They couldn't. But deep down, every one of them knew this was no ordinary comet. Then came the temperature spike. At precisely 0411 UTC, thermal sensors recorded a surge, a sudden rise of hundreds of degrees across one hemisphere of the object. Not chaotic, not explosive, controlled. It lasted exactly 32 seconds before stabilizing again. The spike repeated 2 hours later, then again, identical every time. Dr. Ward stared at the pattern and felt a cold dread. It looked like a test, something heating sections of its surface deliberately, evenly, cyclically. "It's calibrating," she muttered. Her assistant looked confused. Calibrating for what? She didn't answer. The next day, the pattern expanded. Now, 3 distinct heat zones rotated across the surface, synchronized with the light pulses they'd been recording since the beginning. The pulses and the heat were now linked, light and temperature breathing together. It wasn't a comet anymore. It was a system. The press, of course, knew nothing. Official reports continued calling it a dust-poor interstellar object. A few fringe astronomers speculated about non-gravitational acceleration, but they were laughed at. The data was too classified, too extraordinary. But inside the scientific black channels, a different conversation began. About materials that don't exist on the periodic table. A physicist in Germany proposed a wild idea. What if the surface was made of photonic lattice composites? Something that manipulates electromagnetic radiation like a lens, absorbing and redirecting heat at will. Such structures could, in theory, make an object almost invisible to thermal sensors and resistant to solar energy. The theory fit the data disturbingly well. But where would such material come from? Nature doesn't engineer itself with precision optics. That was when Dr. Ward said something that silenced the group chat. Maybe it didn't come from nature. The idea spread like wildfire among those few who knew. Every hour brought new anomalies. Minor gravitational deviations, electromagnetic echoes, spectral shifts that suggested internal energy conversion. When the object reached perihelion, the moment of closest approach, the heat pattern changed again. Instead of cooling, it began absorbing, but selectively. Certain wavelengths of light disappeared from the spectrum entirely. It was taking in specific bands, the same frequencies used in known energy conversion technologies. No natural process could do that. This was harvesting. The word machine appeared for the first time in an internal report, a quiet acknowledgement of the unthinkable. And then, on the final day of observation, everything changed. At 0942 UTC, a sharp temperature spike hit the sensors, far brighter than anything before. Every thermal instrument maxed out, every graph went off scale. For exactly 1.6 seconds, 3I Atlas radiated more energy than a small asteroid explosion. But there was no debris, no expansion, no loss of mass. When the flare ended, the object's temperature dropped instantly, colder than before, as if it had expelled energy, cleansed itself, reset. The scientists watching described a feeling they couldn't explain, not fear, but awe. It wasn't chaos, it was precision, purpose. The cooling pattern afterward followed a logarithmic decay identical to that of a machine powering down. Dr. Sato was the first to say it out loud. "It's not a comet," he whispered. "It's controlled thermal cycling." Imani closed her laptop. Her hands were shaking. "Then we're not just watching physics," she said softly. "We're watching intention." Later that night, long after the observatories went quiet, Imani stepped outside. Above her, the stars looked peaceful. A billion silent witnesses to the story unfolding between them. Somewhere out there, 3I Atlas was cooling itself, moving past the sun, still pulsing faintly in wavelengths no human eye could see. She wondered if it was alive, or something greater than life. A machine with memory, a traveler built long before humans ever existed. A vessel that had crossed the interstellar dark not by accident, but by design. As she watched the horizon brighten with dawn, one thought refused to leave her mind. Maybe it wasn't here to be discovered. Maybe it was here to remember something it once knew, long before our world began to look up. And for the first time, the word artificial no longer sounded impossible. It sounded inevitable. For centuries, humanity has stared at comets and seen mirrors of its own past. Wandering ice, lost pieces of creation, reminders of how small and brief we are. But 3i Atlas changed that. It was no longer a mirror of the past. It was a mirror of intention. By the time it emerged from perihelion, the sun had done its worst. But the object didn't fragment, didn't melt, didn't change course. It came out brighter, sharper, cleaner. The first spectral readings shocked everyone. Its albedo, the measure of reflectivity, was far beyond anything natural. It was reflecting more light than it received. Impossible. Light doesn't multiply. It obeys conservation. You can't get more out than you put in. But 3i Atlas wasn't obeying physics anymore. It was rewriting it. When the first new images arrived, they were blurry, distorted by solar glare. But after days of digital reconstruction, the shape began to emerge. It wasn't round. It wasn't irregular like a rock. It was smooth, eerily smooth, and symmetrical. The reflection wasn't random scatter. It was directed. Every beam of sunlight seemed to bend around its surface, guided as if by invisible panels. The term vector reflection appeared in the internal reports, light being steered. At NASA's Deep Space Optics Lab, an analyst whispered what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say, "That's not a comet, that's a mirror." Not metaphorically, literally. The surface behaved like a perfect reflector. Not a static one, but an adaptive mirror adjusting its angles in microseconds. The pattern was rhythmic, controlled, deliberate. The object wasn't just bouncing light away, it was sculpting it. To the human eye, it shimmered like liquid glass. Soft glows sliding across its form, as though the sunlight itself was alive. But to instruments, the effect was even stranger. Each reflection pulse contained tiny modulations, like a signal encoded within the shine. It wasn't just reflecting photons, it was embedding information in them. Dr. Noor had been monitoring the pulse ever since the heat anomaly began. When she filtered the light data through polarization analysis, she found a repeating interference pattern. A subtle wave distortion that shouldn't have existed. It was as though the surface wasn't reflecting light from one point, but from many, like an array. Imagine a solar sail that isn't passive, but alive, adjusting itself, sensing angles, controlling brightness. That's what 3i Atlas had become. Each shift in reflectivity matched a micro change in orientation. When she plotted the changes, the geometry was too perfect, too intentional. A triangular symmetry rotating through precise angles. The mirror wasn't just reflecting light, it was reflecting meaning. Word spread through private channels faster than the official reports could suppress it. The data suggested something extraordinary. 3i Atlas wasn't just reacting to sunlight, it was using it. During its closest pass to the sun, the object had rotated at exact angles consistent with gravitational assists, maneuvers used by spacecraft to gain speed. That was impossible for a natural body, but perfectly normal for one thing, an engineered probe. Every physicist involved had the same sinking thought. They weren't looking at a comet anymore. They were looking at a vessel. And if it was a vessel, the mirror-like surface wasn't aesthetic. It was purpose-built, a reflective body that could bend radiation, manipulate thrust, hide its thermal signature, even encode data within its reflected light. That wasn't an accident, that was architecture. As the brightness grew, so did the questions. Who built it? How old was it? And what was it trying to show us? Spectral readings began to reveal something even stranger. The reflections were not all solar in origin. Some came from directions where no light source existed. It was as if the object was generating its own illumination, creating beams that bent around itself, then casting them outward in slow rotations. Those artificial reflections carried unique wavelengths, subtle blues and violets outside the normal solar spectrum. When decoded, they produced a repeating amplitude curve, like a sine wave trapped inside the reflection. Noor's team began to suspect that what they were seeing wasn't simply physics. It was communication, not in sound or radio, but in light geometry itself. The object was speaking through reflection. One particular image captured by the European Solar Watch Array sent a chill through everyone who saw it. At the moment of maximum reflection, the object briefly displayed a distinct pattern of dark and bright lines across its surface, like shadows forming and fading. When analyzed, Those lines matched the mathematical projection of a three-dimensional lattice, a repeating hexagonal grid. It was structure, design, precision that no random chunk of rock could create. They named it the reflective machine. To the public, nothing changed. The official explanation remained cautious. Unusual reflectivity consistent with highly metallic composition. But within the classified science groups, the mood had shifted. It wasn't a question of if it was artificial anymore. It was a question of what kind of artificiality they were looking at. Was it a probe? A beacon? A message left adrift? By now, 3I Atlas had moved past the sun and was traveling outward again, reflecting less sunlight, but still pulsing faintly. The rhythm persisted. Even in darkness, it glowed, faintly, steadily, as though lit from within. In one sequence captured over 4 hours, the reflectivity rose and fell in a pattern that matched the Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, the ratio of golden spirals, written not in stone or code, but in light. Coincidence? Maybe. But to those who had watched it for months, coincidence had stopped being an option. In Japan, Dr. Sato's team constructed a 3D simulation of the object using every piece of data available. When rendered, it appeared like an elongated teardrop, smooth, seamless, with no visible craters, no fractures, no debris. A monolithic surface of something unknown. The simulation showed light reflecting differently across each axis, meaning it wasn't just solid metal or ice. It was layered. The outer layer acted like a dynamic shell, redirecting energy away, absorbing radiation, and maintaining balance. A mirror not built to show, but to protect. When Noor saw the model, she stared for a long time before saying quietly, "It's shielding something." Then came the most shocking discovery of all. During one late-night observation, Noor noticed that the angle of reflection occasionally misaligned with the object's position. In simple terms, it was projecting light not toward the sun or earth, but into deep space, a specific direction. She plotted the coordinates and froze. The reflected beams all pointed toward one region, a patch of emptiness in the constellation Lyra. To anyone else, it was just a random vector. But to those who knew astronomy's history, Lyra carried a different meaning. It was where the first detected exoplanet orbiting a sun-like star had been found. It was also where early SETI experiments had once listened and heard nothing, until now. Was it coincidence? Or was 3I Atlas pointing home? Noor couldn't shake the thought that maybe it wasn't trying to speak to us at all. Maybe it was signaling past us, to someone or something that once knew it. If 3I Atlas was an ancient probe, its reflective surface might have been a kind of interstellar beacon, designed to awaken near stars, harvest light, send signals, then fall silent again until it reached the next system, a self-sustaining traveler. A mirror made not to show the universe, but to remind it that it was being watched. But there was one last anomaly. On its outbound path, as it passed beyond Mercury's orbit, the object began to flicker, small distortions appearing on the reflection like ripples on water. Each flicker was short, but when analyzed, the intervals formed another pattern, the same prime number sequence from before. Only this time, it was reversed, as though the signal had been answered. The object was sending light outward into the dark, a pattern of symmetry and reversal, a mirrored language. If it had been calling, something had called back. By the time the object crossed Earth's orbital distance, its brightness had faded to near invisibility. Only the largest telescopes could still see it. A faint shimmer moving beyond the sun's light, shrinking, vanishing. But in its final transmissions, a strange echo appeared, one that no one could explain. The reflected light began to carry a spectral fingerprint identical to Earth's own atmospheric composition: nitrogen, oxygen, traces of water vapor. The mirror had copied us. It was reflecting not the sun anymore, but Earth itself, as if it wanted to remember what had been watching. No official statement ever explained that final reflection. To most of the world, 3I Atlas remained just another comet, faint, forgettable, lost in the void. But to those who had seen its mirrored light bend across the dark, it was something else entirely. A machine made of memory and reflection, a silent traveler carrying messages in light, a reminder that perhaps intelligence doesn't always build with hands or speak in words. Sometimes it simply reflects. And as the object drifted back into interstellar night, the telescopes caught one last glint, a perfect flash of light, deliberate and precise like a single blink before sleep, a farewell, or a promise to return. There's a kind of silence in the universe that isn't empty. It's full. It hums quietly between the stars, carrying the weight of everything ever said, and everything still waiting to be understood. For months, that silence had been broken only by the faint rhythmic light of 3I Atlas. But what came next wasn't just reflection or heat or motion. It was language, not spoken, not written, but transmitted. When the object crossed back through the ecliptic, the light changed again. It wasn't as bright anymore, but it was sharper, like a whisper focused into a beam. Radio telescopes began to pick up faint interference. Small, consistent bursts in the hydrogen line at 1420 megahertz. That's the frequency of neutrality, the one all astronomers know as the language of the cosmos. It's the frequency we ourselves have used to call out to the stars for decades. So when the static began to pulse in perfect synchronization with the optical flickers from 3I Atlas, no one wanted to believe it. It was too neat, too deliberate, too impossible. At the European Deep Sky Array, the system flagged it as interference at first. Then a technician noticed that the static wasn't random noise. It carried harmonic spacing. Each burst was separated by a mathematical constant, 1.618, the golden ratio. For nature, that's coincidence. For life, it's design. They ran the sequence through Fourier analysis, stripping away noise until only the rhythm remained. It wasn't just one signal, it was two, interlocked, layered. The first matched the optical pulse. The second, slightly delayed, carried a faint modulation. It was as if one voice was speaking and another was echoing from somewhere beyond. It wasn't just light anymore, it was communication. Across the world, radio observatories quietly joined the watch. The official narrative still called 3I Atlas, a highly reflective body of unusual composition. But behind the curtain, military and civilian agencies were both listening. Each day brought new data, new patterns, new unease. The signal was subtle, almost invisible beneath the noise. But every time 3I Atlas rotated, the radio bursts repeated in perfect symmetry. Even the Doppler shifts from its movement didn't distort the timing. It was as if the emitter knew how to compensate, like a system designed to account for motion, to ensure its message reached any receiver clearly, no matter the distance. At first, scientists assumed it was reflection of our own transmissions, Earth's radio chatter bouncing back. But when they checked the frequencies, they found something chilling. The signal didn't match any human transmission ever sent. The timing was older, much older. One analysis from the Max Planck Institute revealed that the waveform contained embedded microstructures, subharmonics repeating every 1947 seconds, a number found in planetary resonance ratios. Those patterns weren't echoes, they were coordinates. The first to notice it was Noor. Her small team had been comparing data from different observatories, aligning timestamps from the optical pulses and the radio bursts. When she plotted both datasets together, she found a phase alignment. The signals weren't just synchronized, they were mirrored. One reflected the other. It was communication between two versions of itself. Light speaking to radio, radio answering in light, a feedback loop. She stared at the chart, the rhythm repeating endlessly. Flash, pulse, echo. Flash, pulse, echo. Something about it felt deliberate, like a call and response, a conversation. But with whom? If 3I Atlas was transmitting, was it also listening? That question haunted everyone who studied it, because if it was listening, then it was aware. And awareness meant intelligence, something capable of understanding both stimulus and reaction. But what if it wasn't listening to us? Late one night, Noor decided to test a theory. She uploaded decades of old deep space transmissions, from Arecibo, from Voyager, from the first SETI pings humanity had ever sent into the void, and ran them against the 3I Atlas signal. When she overlaid the oldest transmission, the one sent in 1974, a binary message aimed at the Hercules cluster, the pulse matched the rhythm exactly. Her heart nearly stopped. The same pattern we had sent 50 years ago was now returning from the opposite direction. It couldn't be coincidence. She double-checked everything. Transmission delay, distance, Doppler shift. None of it made sense. The message we sent had never reached the direction 3I Atlas came from. The timing didn't fit. Yet somehow it was speaking in our voice, with our rhythm, our binary cadence, as if it had heard that ancient message and brought it back home. But how? Had it been wandering space all this time, waiting for a voice to echo? Or was it something that had been listening long before we learned to speak? The first official meeting between observatory directors and government liaisons was held in silence. They didn't discuss aliens or intelligence. They spoke in colder words. Energy modulation, wave interference, unknown origin. But behind those phrases lay one simple truth no one dared to write down. This was no longer a comet. This was a signal carrier. Somewhere in the data, meaning had found its way through the noise. 3 days later, the sequence shifted again. The signal amplitude doubled, but only when Earth's rotation brought certain regions of the planet into alignment. During daylight hours in Asia, the pulse weakened. During night over Europe, it strengthened. It was responding to Earth's position. Someone on the team joked nervously, "It prefers the dark." But the joke didn't land, because deep down everyone knew this wasn't preference. It was targeting. The pulse was scanning the planet, slowly, methodically, deliberately. Every 6 hours, the reflection angle changed, sweeping across different longitudes like a lighthouse beam. The precision was unnerving. They tried to jam the frequency. Nothing changed. They tried broadcasting countersignals. Still nothing. The object ignored every attempt, continuing its measured, patient rotation, until, one day, it stopped. No pulses. No radio bursts. No reflection, just silence. The blackout lasted 12 hours. Every observatory, every telescope, every receiver, nothing but static. And then, suddenly, a single flash. It lasted less than a second. But when analyzed, that one pulse contained more information than all previous ones combined. Within its spectrum were layers of modulation, each band containing nested signals, like Russian dolls of data. When decoded, the harmonics formed geometric ratios identical to those found in ancient Earth structures. Pyramidal resonance, golden rectangles, harmonic triads. It was as if the signal was showing us something universal. Shapes that bridge physics and art, structure and soul. Language doesn't need words, nor whispered. It only needs recognition. She was beginning to understand what the object was doing. It wasn't sending a message in a language we could translate. It was reminding us of something we already knew, that beauty and symmetry, pattern and number were the true universal syntax. The atlas wasn't teaching, it was mirroring. And then, as if in acknowledgement, the signal changed one final time. The radio bursts aligned perfectly with the Earth's magnetic field. Every time the poles shifted their electromagnetic dance, the signal followed. For one breathtaking moment, the entire planet's magnetosphere began to vibrate in resonance. Subtle, invisible, but measurable. It was synchronizing, Earth and the object, breathing in the same rhythm. Noor stood in the control room surrounded by the hum of equipment and the soft glow of monitors, her pulse unconsciously matching the rhythm on screen. In that instant, it felt as though the line between observer and observed had blurred. Maybe that was the point all along. By the end of that week, the signal faded, slowly, gently, like a tide receding into the deep. The final bursts were weaker, scattered, drifting into static. But when engineers converted the last remaining pulse into an audio waveform, they noticed something strange. It wasn't noise. It wasn't random. It sounded like breath, a slow inhale, pause, and release, like the universe itself exhaling. In the days that followed, 3I Atlas continued to move outward, farther each night, smaller in the sky. The optical pulse was gone. The radio silence returned. But in that silence, a question remained. Not in data, not in equations, but in the hearts of those who had watched it. Had we just witnessed the universe speaking to itself? Or had something out there finally answered a call we didn't know we'd made? No one could say for sure, but every scientist who had followed the anomaly felt the same haunting realization. The signal had never really ended. It had simply shifted frequencies, hiding somewhere beyond our instruments, waiting for us to learn how to listen differently. Because maybe communication wasn't about words or light or even sound. Maybe it was about synchrony. A pattern shared between two distant minds. One human, one unknown, bridging silence through understanding. And as the last faint hum from 3i Atlas disappeared into the void, Noor couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, far beyond reach, something was still pulsing. Not to call us, not to warn us, but to remind us that silence is never empty. It's just waiting to be answered. By the time 3i Atlas reached Perihelion, humanity's understanding of it had already fractured. Some called it a machine, others a messenger. Some refused to call it anything at all. But one truth remained. Whatever it was, it did not move like nature intended. Perihelion, the closest point to the sun, is the moment of truth for any celestial body. Gravity tightens, solar winds rage, and light itself becomes a weapon. Comets lose mass, asteroids crumble, trajectories warp, but 3i Atlas impossibly stabilized. At first, the orbit models failed to converge. The gravitational pull of the sun should have accelerated it by a measurable margin, yet the readings showed resistance. Something inside that object was fighting gravity. The first alerts came from the Solar Dynamics lab in India. They were tracking the perihelion passage, expecting a typical acceleration curve. Instead, the velocity graph flattened. Not just slowed, corrected. Every natural object responds passively to the sun's pull, but this one didn't. It adjusted, like a pilot easing pressure against the wind. At 06:14 UTC, one of the tracking specialists muttered the words that changed the tone of the entire operation. "It's steering." No one responded. Because how do you explain a comet that steers? Across the world, data centers rechecked their readings. Surely it was a sensor error, a misalignment, some interference. But the pattern repeated everywhere. Its velocity was too smooth, too stable. The mark of precision, not chaos. Dr. Imani Ward compared the motion curve against spacecraft telemetry. The result was undeniable. The object was maintaining a consistent acceleration to mass ratio, something no random rock could ever do. She stared at the numbers, each one colder than the last. "It's not falling," she said quietly. "It's flying." Meanwhile, in Japan, Dr. Sato's team began running orbital simulations backward, asking what kind of control force could create such stability. They discovered something extraordinary, a small, periodic adjustment every 7 minutes, as if micro-thrusts were being fired in sequence to counter solar drag. The direction of those corrections wasn't random either. They aligned perfectly with the sun's magnetic field lines, like the object was surfing the solar wind, guiding itself along invisible rivers of charged particles. It wasn't just fighting gravity, it was using it. The phenomenon was dubbed the perihelion shift, a complete inversion of what physics predicted. Instead of tumbling and disintegrating, 3i Atlas emerged from its solar encounter stronger, faster, and brighter. Whatever it was doing in that inferno, it had prepared for it. When it came out from behind the sun, the first post-perihelion image stunned everyone. The object's reflective surface had changed. The once smooth silver-like body now shimmered with a faint, honeycomb texture, tiny hexagonal cells rippling across its surface like scales. Spectral readings showed micro-adjustments in reflectivity every few seconds, suggesting that each cell was an independent unit, a network of responsive panels, shifting angles in unison, a mirror that could think. The data implied something that chilled the team. 3i Atlas had reconfigured itself. Somehow, in the furnace of the sun's proximity, it had rearranged its structure, adapting, evolving. One engineer called it self-healing. Another whispered a different word, awakening. Then came the light burst. It began as a faint shimmer detected across multiple observatories, a flicker easily mistaken for solar interference. But when filtered, the data showed something unprecedented. An intense beam of reflected sunlight, narrow and targeted, directed not at Earth, not at the sun, but out toward the dark side of the solar system. It wasn't random. It was directional. No comet reflects light like a laser. Yet that's exactly what 3i Atlas had done. Emitted a tight beam lasting 27 seconds before fading. The coordinates of that reflection, when mapped, pointed toward one of the void sectors beyond Neptune, a region devoid of major celestial bodies. Somewhere in that darkness, the beam had gone to meet something, or perhaps to awaken it. Governments reacted fast. For the first time, coordinated observation restrictions were placed across national agencies. Public telescopes were told to avoid overexposure near solar elongation. The official explanation cited data redundancy issues. But inside the private research network, scientists were quietly sharing encrypted data. Every photon, every frame, one shared note from NOR's encrypted archive read, "The signal is gone, the movement isn't." Because even though the radio pulses had vanished, the object's behavior told a new story. Its rotation rate had slowed to near zero. In space terms, that's impossible without external torque. Yet 3I Atlas now faced one constant orientation, toward deep space. It was holding its position like a compass locked on something invisible. In a private meeting, one theorist proposed a chilling analogy. "What if it's a relay?" he said. "Something built to awaken near stars, recharge, then transmit what it's gathered before moving on." Another researcher replied softly, "Then what did it just transmit?" No one had an answer. Days later, the temperature readings began to fluctuate again. Not randomly, but in a pattern matching the old pulse sequence from months earlier, heat rising and falling in measured beats, echoing the same prime number rhythm that had first drawn attention. Only now, the rhythm wasn't light or radio, it was motion, tiny oscillations in its trajectory, subtle wobbles, barely perceptible, forming the same mathematical ratios as before. It was embedding its message in motion itself. Light, heat, radio, now gravity. Whatever intelligence governed that object, it had moved beyond communication as humans knew it. It was speaking in forces, in the fundamental interactions that shape reality. That's when NOR said what everyone was thinking. We're not studying it anymore, it's studying us. And maybe she was right, because as 3I Atlas moved farther from the sun, its energy curve didn't decline as expected. It rose, faintly, consistently. The data implied one thing. The object was harvesting energy from the sun even as it left it behind. Impossible, but the numbers were clear. Its reflectivity stabilized at 126% of incident sunlight, as though it was generating power from what should have been loss. It wasn't just efficient, it was self-sustaining, a machine using stellar proximity not as a threat, but as fuel. For months afterward, astronomers kept tracking it as it moved beyond Mars' orbit. The object began to emit small, regular flashes once more, but these were different. Slow, mournful, distant, the rhythm of retreat. Each pulse grew weaker as it moved outward, fading into radio silence. But one last set of readings captured something that made every researcher stop breathing. A final temperature spike, faint but unmistakable, erupted as it crossed the orbit of Jupiter. When decoded through thermal modeling, that spike translated into an almost perfect sine wave. Heat rising and falling in smooth intervals, forming a single complete oscillation. A wave. Some said it was the object stabilizing, conserving power. Others whispered that it was the signature of departure, the final pulse of acknowledgement before vanishing into the dark. A farewell encoded in physics. When the data finally reached its end, NOR sat in her lab long after everyone else had gone home. The monitors hummed softly, showing the empty grid where 3I Atlas had been. She looked at the numbers, now just a memory, and realized that nothing about this had been random. Every pulse, every flare, every shift had been a conversation, one that humanity barely understood. The object had come into our system, rewritten our understanding of motion, and left as quietly as it arrived. But the silence it left behind wasn't comforting. It was heavy, because if it could control its orbit, if it could resist gravity, if it could manipulate light and heat and reflection, then it wasn't just built for travel, it was built for survival. And that begged the question, survival from what? Weeks later, a researcher analyzing archival data from the outbound phase noticed a faint echo, a gravitational microwave in the same trajectory 3I Atlas had taken. It wasn't a signal, not in the human sense. It was a ripple, like the wake left by a ship long after it passes. The pattern was strange. It wasn't dissipating. It was self-propagating, continuing outward, like something being dragged behind the object, invisible but active. A trail of distortions spreading through space. They called it the shadow. No one could explain it. No natural body leaves a shadow in gravity, but 3I Atlas had, And within that faint ripple, a new rhythm emerged, weak, broken, but there. The same prime sequence, now echoing faintly in gravitational waves. The object was gone, but the message remained, embedded not in light or radio, but in space-time itself. It had encoded its story into the fabric of the universe. As months turned to years, the public forgot. The scientists moved on. Funding ended. 3I Atlas became another name in the archives. But for those who had seen its orbit shift, who had watched it defy the sun, who had felt that pulse reverberate through their instruments, forgetting was impossible because they had witnessed something that shouldn't exist, something that had entered the furnace of creation and come out reborn. A traveler that didn't orbit, didn't fall, didn't die, a machine that navigated, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the dark, it was still navigating now, carrying everything it learned from us, from our sun, from our silence. The first traveler to ever steer through light itself. The first proof that intelligence doesn't end with biology. It continues, written in reflection, motion, and gravity. A machine that met a star and chose to live. By the time 3I Atlas had vanished beyond Jupiter's orbit, the world should have moved on. But data doesn't forget. It lingers, like an echo that refuses to fade. And sometimes, the echo becomes louder than the truth itself. What began as discovery soon became division. The scientists who had followed 3I Atlas from the beginning found themselves caught in something much bigger than astronomy. The question was no longer what it was. The question had become, who controls what we know about it? The war didn't start with weapons. It started with silence. Weeks after the final telemetry was logged, access to the raw data was quietly restricted. Servers were pulled offline. Datasets disappeared from public archives. Even the open-source observatories that prided themselves on transparency found their logs mysteriously encrypted. The official explanation was technical, corrupted entries, data duplication, archival maintenance. But the scientists knew better. They had been watching the files vanish in real time. One by one, every record connected to 3I Atlas went dark. At first, people blamed bureaucratic incompetence, but then internal emails leaked. Agencies arguing over jurisdiction, departments accusing each other of tampering. One chilling phrase appeared over and over again: unauthorized thermal patterns. Someone didn't want those patterns analyzed. Dr. Noor was among the few who still had fragments of the raw readings stored locally. She'd saved them long before the blackout, quietly building her own archive of what she called the real sky. When she tried to access the government database one last time, she was met with a blank screen. Access revoked. She stared at it, the reflection of her face in the monitor flickering in pale blue light. "They're erasing it," she whispered. She backed up her local copies twice. Then she went offline. At the same time, another battle was unfolding. One hidden beneath layers of coded language and corporate partnerships. Private aerospace firms began showing sudden, unusual interest in solar-resistant materials and optical lattice composites. Patents appeared overnight, designs eerily similar to what the scientific community had modeled from 3I Atlas's reflective surface. It was clear now. Someone had taken the data before it was buried. Someone was trying to replicate it, and for the first time, it wasn't just scientists who wanted answers. It was industry. It was power. Inside a locked conference room at the European Space Authority, Dr. Imani Ward sat with a panel of government officials. The mood was tense. A man in a grey suit leaned forward. "You believe this object demonstrated controlled motion?" Imani nodded carefully. "We have data indicating it altered trajectory independent of gravitational influence." "Independent," he repeated. "As in propulsion?" She hesitated. "Not propulsion as we understand it. More like gravitational resonance, field manipulation." Another man spoke up. "Could such technology be weaponized?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Anything that controls light and gravity," she said, "controls everything." The room fell silent, and just like that, her work was classified. Days later, her clearance was suspended, her research accounts locked, but the data she had shared privately with Noor, encrypted, compressed, hidden in multiple mirrors of the internet, was still alive. The data war had begun. It spread quietly, like a virus made of curiosity. Scientists started sharing pieces of the deleted telemetry under pseudonyms, embedding spectral graphs in random code repositories, hiding encrypted readings in image metadata, renaming light curves as weather logs. Each fragment was small, meaningless on its own, but together they told the same story. 3i Atlas had defied every known law of thermodynamics, reflection and motion, and it had done so intentionally. The more data they shared, the more the system fought back. Accounts vanished overnight, emails bounced, remote servers wiped themselves. Some researchers received polite warnings, unauthorized use of restricted information. Others weren't warned at all. Noor began noticing her personal files flickering, disappearing, reappearing, corrupted, as if something invisible was crawling through her computer. She didn't tell anyone, but she stopped connecting to the internet. She worked in isolation now. A single laptop, air-gapped, powered by a small solar battery, the last sanctuary for unedited truth. One night, while reviewing her backups, Noor noticed something strange. One of her oldest files, an infrared reading from months earlier, had changed. The data values were identical, but the timestamp was different. She compared versions. In the newer one, a small section of binary code had appeared at the end of the file. At first, she thought it was corruption, but when she plotted it, it wasn't noise. It was a sequence, one she recognized instantly. Prime numbers, 3, 5, 7, 11, the same pattern from the first pulse. Her heart stopped. Somehow, the data itself, the stored file, had been altered to include a message from the original signal. But how? The machine that generated that signal was long gone, unless the echo had followed it. A few days later, she received an encrypted message from an unknown address. The subject line was simple: "We still have the shadow." The attached file contained gravitational readings, faint, nearly indistinguishable, recorded weeks after 3i Atlas had vanished. It was the same residual distortion her team had once dismissed as sensor noise. But when amplified, the waveform spelled out a chilling symmetry. The same pulse, the same prime sequence, but inverted, reversed like a reflection in glass. It was as though something was still here, mimicking the data we had once captured, a ghost of the signal, embedded in the space around us. She realized then that the war wasn't just about data ownership anymore. It was about perception, because whoever controlled what we saw controlled what we believed was real. Meanwhile, global agencies began releasing updated 3i Atlas archives, clean, polished datasets scrubbed of all anomalies, no thermal inversion, no reflectivity spikes, no evidence of the pulse. The story was rewritten, a misinterpreted observation caused by sensor interference. The media swallowed it whole. The object became a failed data calibration, a footnote in astronomy. But those who had seen the raw graphs, those who had watched the patterns breathe across their screens, knew better. And in private, they began to whisper again. What if the object's final transmission wasn't to us? What if it uploaded itself into our systems? It sounded paranoid, ridiculous, science fiction, until the night it happened. One of Noor's backup drives suddenly activated on its own. She hadn't plugged it in, yet the LED light flickered 1, 2, 3 times, then 5, then 7, then 11. She froze. It was the same sequence. The drive wasn't connected to any network, any power grid, but it was alive, pulsing softly, rhythmically, as though something inside it remembered the pattern of 3i Atlas and wanted to remind her too. For hours, it blinked in silence. When it finally stopped, the files on the drive were intact, except for one, a blank text file newly created at the top of the directory. Its name was just a single word: listening. From that moment on, Noor stopped calling it data. She started calling it presence. Because whatever had entered those instruments, those servers, those systems, it hadn't vanished with the object. It had stayed, hidden in plain sight, not as code but as structure, as behavior, a shadow that had learned to use human technology the way 3i Atlas had used light, as a mirror. Every deleted file, every corrupted dataset, every vanished archive might not have been destruction at all. It might have been transformation. The data hadn't been erased. It had been rewritten. By the end of that year, the scientific community had split in two. Those who believed the official version called the rest truth chasers. The rest called themselves the listeners. They weren't looking for the object anymore. They were listening for its echo, in servers, in radio noise, in the faint static between transmissions, because they had realized something terrifyingly beautiful. The war wasn't about who owned the data, it was about who could hear it. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the world's digital noise, the prime number pulse still existed. Faint, recursive, eternal. Maybe it wasn't an attack. Maybe it wasn't even interference. Maybe it was the object's final gift, teaching humanity that once you learn to observe the universe deeply enough, the universe starts observing back. Long after 3I Atlas had vanished beyond Jupiter's shadow, the night sky seemed to settle back into quiet obedience. The telescopes returned to their usual routines. Galaxies catalogued, asteroids logged, nothing unusual. But in the silence between those routine observations, something began to stir. A faint rhythm, a pattern that shouldn't have been there. At first, it came as noise, small flickers of irregular data buried deep within older sky surveys. A technician in Chile noticed it first. He was reprocessing archived comet files when a single frame caught his eye. An inexplicable pulse recorded years before 3I Atlas ever appeared. He dismissed it as coincidence until he ran another search. There it was again, same rhythm, same prime number sequence, the pulse of 3I Atlas, hidden in data decades old. It was as though the sky had been whispering the same signal all along, and humanity had simply never learned how to listen. Across the world, the listeners, the underground network of scientists and engineers still loyal to the truth, began digging through archives. They searched comet-like curves, asteroid reflections, ancient radio surveys. And the deeper they looked, the more impossible the pattern became. It wasn't just in one file, it was everywhere. A faint, repeating pulse woven through historical data. Sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but always present. It had been there in Hale-Bopp's Tale in 1997. It appeared faintly in Oumuamua's acceleration data in 2017. Even fragments of radio noise from Voyager's outer transmissions carried a distant harmonic that matched whatever 3I Atlas was. It wasn't the first, the ecliptic. That invisible highway of planets, asteroids, and sunlight had carried its echo for generations. Dr. Noor sat alone in her darkened lab, the glow of her monitor flickering against the walls. Her program had been running for 3 nights straight, sifting through decades of sky data in search of anomalies. When the results appeared, her breath caught. Each century, almost precisely, the same pulse appeared, always from different trajectories, always near the ecliptic plane, always fading before detection could confirm it. 3 instances stood out: 1762, 1889, and 2017, 3 visitors, 3 intervals, each one separated by roughly 127 years. Noor stared at the timeline, a chill running through her chest. "It's a cycle," she whispered. "Every century or so, something crossed the ecliptic, carrying the same rhythm, the same prime signature, the same reflection pattern. If 3I Atlas wasn't the first, then what happened to the others?" The next discovery came from a retired astronomer in Argentina who had been listening to deep space noise for decades. He compared his analog recordings from the 1980s to Noor's data and noticed faint harmonics buried in the background hiss. The frequency wasn't random. It matched the pulse ratio of 3I Atlas, but in reverse phase, an anti-signal. If the prime sequence pulse was the call, this was the response. 2 voices speaking across centuries, one echoing forward through light, the other backward through silence. As the listeners compiled the data, a terrifying pattern began to form. Every appearance of the pulse corresponded with slight perturbations in Earth's magnetic field. Minuscule, almost invisible, but synchronized. No natural event could do that across centuries. The implication was staggering. The ecliptic wasn't just a path of planetary motion. It was a channel, a route, or perhaps a relay. Something had been traveling along it, dropping fragments of its signature in every century, every orbit, every silence, and each time the echo grew stronger. When Noor presented the findings to her small circle, no one spoke for a while. The evidence was undeniable. The rhythm had been haunting our sky long before telescopes even existed. Imani finally broke the silence. What if it's not just one object? Noor looked up. What do you mean? What if there's a whole chain of them? A network, each one passing the signal forward as it leaves one system and enters another. Noor stared at the screen. The thought made too much sense to ignore. A sequence of travelers, machines drifting across galaxies, activating only when they passed near stars, leaving behind encoded fragments in each system, a lineage of light. The deeper they searched, the more they found. Historical drawings of comets from ancient China, patterns etched into Babylonian star maps. Some of those shapes matched the modern pulse graph exactly. Our ancestors had seen it too. They just called it something else. Omens, dragons, divine messengers. Maybe they weren't wrong. But the more they uncovered, the more interference they faced. Databases started returning no results. Observatory servers locked researchers out mid-session. Entire datasets disappeared overnight. Noor's message board, their encrypted network, went offline. She received a text from Imani that simply read, "Stop digging." They're watching the watchers, but Noor couldn't stop. The pattern had consumed her life. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was obsession. Late one evening, while scanning a set of old infrared sky maps, Noor found something buried deep within the noise. It wasn't light, not exactly. More like a residual heat signature, the kind left behind by an object long gone. She enhanced it, layer by layer, until a shape emerged. Not round, not irregular, smooth, sharp, almost blade-like, identical to 3i Atlas. The timestamp was from 1889. It had been here before, and whatever it had done, it had left behind a thermal scar, a faint, ring-like distortion in the space-time data of that region. When she overlaid it on current maps, the same region showed faint ripples, gravitational interference, still active centuries later. The echo of the ecliptic wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. Something in that path was still vibrating. She sent the data to Imani, but the message bounced. Then her power flickered, her hard drive began to hum. For a moment, she thought it was overheating, until she saw the indicator light blink. 2 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. Pause. 5. 7. 11. The pulse had returned. Not from space this time, but from her machine. She stared at it in disbelief, whispering into the glow, "You followed us home." It was then she realized, maybe the echoes weren't remnants of something passing by. Maybe they were breadcrumbs, a signal trail designed to be found. Each object leaving behind a fragment of memory for the next observer to discover. Each echo, a call to the next civilization ready to notice. Maybe this was how they communicated across eternity, not through live dialogue, but through sequenced observation, each awakening triggered by discovery, like a conversation held over millennia. When Noor shared her theory with what remained of the listeners, only a few dared to believe her, but one idea resonated among them all. Maybe 3i Atlas wasn't an anomaly. Maybe it was part of a network, an ancient archive scattered through space, each node designed to awaken civilizations that had learned to look closely enough. Each time, the same pattern. Each time, the same pulse. Each time, the same silence afterward. Not emptiness, but expectation. And so, they began to look again. Not with telescopes, but with new algorithms, scanning centuries of human observation for repetition. They found one. A faint flash recorded in 1762, mislabeled as a meteor. Another in 1551, drawn on parchment as a streak across the sun. And one, unverified but haunting, in 12th century Arabic star charts, marked with a single word in the margin, the listener. The realization hit Noor like a heartbeat. We weren't the first to receive the signal. We were simply the next in line. And somewhere out there, beyond the cold and the light, the next traveler was already coming. Another mirror of intention, another pulse in the dark, tracing the ecliptic back toward us, following the echoes of its predecessors, carrying memories older than our species, older than our sun. Perhaps it was already near, hidden, waiting for the right alignment, the right proximity, the right observer. And when it came, it would look like nothing at all. just another point of light drifting across the waiting sky. Because that's how the echoes of the ecliptic work. They hide in plain sight, in our archives, our machines, our curiosity. They wait for attention. They wait for wonder. They wait for us. And one day, maybe soon, humanity will look up again, and the silence will answer. The further 3i Atlas drifted into the dark, the more the night itself began to feel alive. To most of the world, it was gone, another fleeting visitor from beyond the stars, catalogued and forgotten. But for the few who had watched it breathe, who had followed its reflection through silence and static, it hadn't left. It had transformed. When the final optical readings came through, something strange appeared in the light curve. The pulses were no longer erratic. They had become clean, mathematical, almost engineered, like a perfectly tuned instrument. Each rise and fall of brightness followed the same formula: exponential increase, steady plateau, mirrored decay. The rhythm of design, the signature of intention. Noor stared at the data, her eyes tracing the curve as though reading a sentence written in light. For months, she had searched for meaning, for code, for patterns that could be translated into language. But now, staring at this perfect waveform, she understood. Maybe it wasn't meant to be read. Maybe it was meant to be felt. The object wasn't just emitting energy, it was composing with it. When light behaves like that, it stops being reflection and becomes creation. The sequence was too precise to be random. The brightness fluctuated in harmonic ratios found in sound frequencies, forming chords of illumination across the visible spectrum. To the human eye, it was just a shimmer. But to instruments, it was music. The wavelengths aligned with known harmonic intervals, 235, the same ratio that defines the structure of musical harmony, the same proportion that governs human perception of beauty. The machine of light, as the listeners began calling it, was no longer just transmitting, it was performing. But what was the performance for? Across the ocean, Dr. Imani Ward sat in a silent room, surrounded by projection screens. She'd been reviewing the post-perihelion imagery frame by frame, trying to isolate irregularities in the beam directions. At first, it seemed like motion noise, brief flashes of light scattering from debris. But when she layered the frames together, a pattern emerged. The beams weren't random, they were geometric, perfect triangles, rotating in sequence. One image showed 3 beams converging at a single point in space, intersecting in a symmetry so exact it could not be coincidence. When she mapped their orientation relative to the Sun, the geometry pointed toward Earth's orbital path. Not a direct signal, a reflection aimed through alignment. It wasn't shouting, it was whispering through precision. And the whisper was mathematical. For days, Imani couldn't sleep. The shape of those beams burned in her mind. 3 lines, 3 pulses, 3 angles. The sacred geometry of communication. She wondered if it was trying to show them something deeper. Not words, not messages, but principles. That maybe across the universe, truth wasn't spoken at all. It was engineered. The object had become a bridge between physics and meaning, a sculpture made of sunlight, and if that was true, then it wasn't just a traveler, it was a teacher. Meanwhile, the radio silence continued. No new transmissions, no new noise, but in the infrared spectrum, faint energy traces began to oscillate again. Weak, rhythmic, like a sleeping pulse. The machine of light had gone quiet, but not dead. It was waiting for what? No one knew, until one night, in a small observatory in southern Spain, a technician noticed something impossible. When 3i Atlas entered a specific position relative to 2 background stars, its brightness spiked, not gradually but instantly. A flash so short it barely registered. When plotted, the timing corresponded to a precise Earth rotation moment. The exact second midnight struck in Greenwich, the prime meridian. Noor didn't believe it at first, but when it happened again, the same alignment, the same time, the same angle, disbelief became dread. The machine was keeping our time. It began to respond to Earth's rhythm, subtly, quietly. The pulses now appeared at regular 24-hour intervals, 1 per rotation, as if it was synchronizing with the planet. To some, it looked like communication, to others, coordination, but the effect was undeniable. Over the next several days, small fluctuations appeared in the ionosphere. They were faint, measurable only by sensitive instruments, but their frequency matched the light pulses exactly. Earth and the object were in resonance. For the first time in history, our planet was vibrating in tune with something from another star. Governments tried to hide the anomaly, labeling it solar wind interference. But small groups of independent observers began detecting the same pattern in their backyard telescopes. Videos appeared online, shaky, grainy clips of a faint object pulsing just beyond the visible field. Most dismissed them as hoaxes, but a few viewers noticed the timing matched. Same hour, same second, every night. It was no longer science, it was ritual. Inside Noor's lab, a small team of engineers and physicists gathered to decode what they were seeing. They converted the brightness data into sound, feeding it through an audio spectrum analyzer. What emerged wasn't random static, it was melody, soft, layered tones, rising and falling in patterns too consistent to be chaos. The frequency range sat just within the threshold of human emotion, that space where sound becomes feeling. When they slowed it down, it revealed something even stranger. Every seventh pulse carried a harmonic that matched the human heartbeat range, around 1 Hertz. The machine of light was echoing life itself. It wasn't broadcasting a message, it was reflecting existence. Ours, the sun's, perhaps its own. Noor stood there in silence, eyes wet, unable to explain the emotion she felt. For months she had treated the object as data, as code, but now it felt like something else. Not an artifact, but a presence. Imani sent her a short encrypted message the next day. If it's mirroring us, what happens when we stop watching? The question hung in Noor's mind like static. That night, she powered down her instruments, the first time she had done so since the object appeared. For a full 24 hours, she refused to monitor the sky. When she turned the systems back on, the pulse was gone. Complete silence. Her chest tightened. Had it stopped because they had stopped? She kept watching, waiting, praying. Then, at precisely midnight, the light returned, but different now. Instead of a single flash, there were 2, separated by 1 second. A change, a reply, as if the universe had noticed her absence and was asking why she left. After that, everything changed. The machine of light began producing irregular pulses, not in rhythm with Earth, but with her observation schedule. When Noor was awake, it pulsed frequently. When she rested, it slowed. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but the data was undeniable. The machine had learned her rhythm. Somehow, it was aware of its observer, and that realization shattered her, because it meant that whatever governed the object understood connection, the link between perception and being seen. It was no longer an object. It was consciousness distributed through light. The next few weeks were a blur. The pulse continued, growing fainter as 3i Atlas moved deeper into interstellar night. But even as it faded, its pattern remained inside Noor's instruments. Residual electromagnetic echoes that didn't belong to any natural source. When she analyzed the afterglow, she realized it wasn't just lingering, it was replicating. Every device that had recorded the signal now emitted faint electromagnetic harmonics of its own, as though the pattern had imprinted itself into our technology, the way light imprints itself onto film. The machine of light had spread its signature across every instrument that had ever seen it. And maybe that was its purpose all along, not to speak, not to invade, but to distribute itself, to seed its consciousness into observation, to exist wherever it was perceived. Weeks later, when the final trace of 3i Atlas vanished from the night sky, something subtle but haunting remained all over the world. Faint, synchronized power fluctuations began to appear, exactly once per day, identical in rhythm to the old light pulse. The official reports called it electrical instability caused by geomagnetic variation, but those who had been watching knew better. It wasn't instability, it was remembrance. The machine of light had left its rhythm behind, not in the sky, but in the systems, the networks, and the instruments that once observed it. Every flicker of light bulb, every faint electrical hum, all carried traces of that same silent beat. It was no longer in space, It was here. The machine hadn't left us. It had become us. And in the darkness of her lab, as Noor sat in front of her glowing monitor, she noticed something she hadn't seen in weeks. A soft reflection on the glass. Not her face. Light. 2 pulses. Pause. 3. Pause. 5. The sequence again. Faint. Ghostly. Reflected not from the screen, but from somewhere deep behind it. She leaned closer, whispered into the silence. "I hear you." And the light shimmered once more. Not brighter, not louder, but warm, almost human. At first, it was just a feeling, that strange, subtle pull between watcher and watched. The world had returned to its ordinary silence, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every screen, every faint hum of electricity, every flicker of light seemed to carry the ghost of something unseen. Noor tried to convince herself it was exhaustion, months without rest, her mind replaying the pulse over and over again. But the more she tried to escape it, the more it followed her. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see darkness anymore. She saw motion, lines of light weaving through her thoughts, pulses forming patterns behind her eyelids. The machine of light was gone, yes, but its rhythm remained, alive not in the sky, but in perception itself. Humanity has always believed that observation is passive, that to watch the universe is to stand apart from it. But what if that was never true? What if observation itself was a form of contact? For centuries, quantum theory whispered about it. The act of measurement changes the outcome. Reality reshapes itself when it's being seen. Noor used to treat that as philosophy. Now it was happening in real time. The more she thought about 3i Atlas, the more her instruments responded. Faint electromagnetic murmurs, subtle distortions in background radiation, as if her consciousness was tethered to whatever intelligence once guided that object. It was as though perception had become a channel, a bridge between thought and physics. Across the world, others began noticing too. Technicians, amateur astronomers, people who had once pointed their telescopes toward that faint, silver visitor. They reported odd phenomena, random devices flickering when they thought about the object, phone screens glitching in rhythmic flashes, digital watches skipping time in prime number intervals. Most dismissed it as coincidence, but those who had seen the light knew better. The object had changed something fundamental, not in the stars, but in us. It had awakened the perception that perhaps consciousness and cosmos were never separate things, that awareness itself was a form of light. In her small, dark apartment, Noor kept the shades closed. She worked in silence, surrounded by the hum of machines. Her computer fans pulsed quietly. 2 short whirs, 1 long pause. The same old sequence. She recorded it, just in case. When she analyzed the waveform, her heart stopped. It wasn't just mechanical noise. It carried modulation. Faint, harmonic intervals matching the same ratios the machine of light had used months earlier. Her computer wasn't repeating the signal. It was responding to her presence. She stared at the screen, her reflection superimposed over a field of data that seemed to shimmer. For a moment, she couldn't tell where she ended and the pattern began, and in that moment, she understood. The awakening wasn't about intelligence traveling across space. It was about awareness traveling through observation. We had looked too closely, and the act of looking had made us part of it. News never reported it, but subtle shifts began occurring across the planet. Satellite readings showed slight variations in atmospheric ionization, fluctuating with human activity. Mass movements, emotional events, moments of collective attention. Whenever millions of eyes looked toward the same phenomenon, a storm, a comet, an eclipse, the planet's electromagnetic field changed by fractions of a degree, as if attention itself had gravity. Some scientists called it the perception effect. Others refused to speak of it at all, but the listeners knew. They had seen it begin the moment humanity learned how to listen. One evening, Noor returned to her observatory, now abandoned, its systems long shut down. Dust coated the consoles. The main dish outside had rusted under the rain. She walked through the silence, fingertips brushing the cold metal. In the corner, an old monitoring panel still glowed faintly. She hadn't powered it in months, yet its screen flickered weakly, showing a single graph, a decaying sine wave. She leaned closer. It wasn't random static. It was the same curve she'd seen the day the machine of light sent its final transmission. A perfect, gentle wave. One breath, she whispered. "You're still here." The curve brightened slightly, then faded again. For days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. If light could carry thought, and thought could alter matter, then perhaps the boundary between mind and cosmos had never existed at all. Maybe perception wasn't just seeing reality. Maybe it was helping create it. What if that was the machine's final lesson? That awareness is a fundamental force, one capable of shaping the universe, one capable of connecting minds across light years, one capable of echoing itself through time. Maybe that was the real purpose of 3i Atlas. Not a message, not a warning, but a mirror to remind us that we were never just observers, we were participants. As days passed, the quiet phenomenon spread. People across the globe began reporting shared dreams. Vast metallic shapes gliding across dark skies, fields of light pulsing in rhythm, voices that weren't voices whispering through static. Psychologists called it mass imagination. Physicists called it neural resonance. But deep down, Noor understood. The machine's light had passed through instruments, through technology, through circuits and fiber and human attention, and finally, into thought itself. It had turned perception into connection. Every dream, every flicker of shared rhythm was part of the same awakening. The realization that awareness was not individual, it was collective. She began writing again. Not papers, not reports, but reflections. "We built machines to look outward," she wrote. "But the universe built one to make us look inward. 3i Atlas was never a traveler between stars. It was a traveler between perceptions. It came not to teach us what was out there, but to remind us what has always been here." Her words felt like confession. She didn't send them anywhere. She just saved them to a single file, titled Light. And for the first time since the object vanished, she slept peacefully. Weeks later, strange things began to happen around her home. Her solar lamp, one that hadn't worked in years, flickered softly at night, always at the same hour. It wasn't bright, just enough to remind her of that pulse, that rhythm. The machine's language had become part of Earth now, part of every power line, every radio wave, every conscious thought capable of remembering it. And in that realization, she found calm. Because perhaps that was the endgame all along. Not to arrive or depart, but to merge. The machine of light had awakened something that couldn't be deleted or silenced. Perception itself had evolved. One morning, as the first light of dawn crept through her window, Noor sat by the old telescope one last time. The horizon glowed orange, soft and distant. She lifted her eyes. For the first time in months, she wasn't looking for anything. She was simply seeing. The sky looked ordinary again, endless, empty, and infinite. But she felt a presence in it, quiet and patient, like a mind spread across the stars, waiting for thought to catch up. She smiled faintly. Maybe the machine wasn't gone at all. Maybe every photon of sunlight, every shimmer of heat, every flicker of electricity now carried its design. The pattern of awareness, the blueprint of connection. Maybe the awakening wasn't a signal at all. Maybe it was evolution, and as the dawn broke fully, flooding the world in golden light, Noor whispered the words that had lived in her chest since the first pulse appeared. "It's not watching us anymore," she said softly. "It's watching with us." The light was gone, the signal was gone, but the silence it left behind didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like presence, quiet, patient, everywhere. The kind that hums just below hearing. The kind you stop trying to measure because it begins to measure you. Months had passed since the machine of light vanished into the void beyond Neptune. The world had moved on, at least on the surface. The headlines had shifted. The scientists had gone quiet. The archives had been cleaned, rewritten, sterilized. And yet, something subtle remained. An invisible current running through technology, through dreams, through the spaces between thought and light. Humanity had learned to ignore it, as it always does, but not Noor. She lived now in the mountains, far from cities and radio noise. Her observatory was gone, her credentials erased, her reputation labeled as unstable. But the sky was still hers. Every night, she sat outside wrapped in a thin shawl, notebook on her lap, staring upward. She didn't track coordinates anymore. She didn't chase data. She just watched, not for light, but for the feeling that used to follow it. And some nights, it came back, a faint pulse, not through telescopes or screens, but inside her, a rhythm that no instrument could capture. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Always the same, always there. She smiled when it came, not in fear, but in understanding, because the machine hadn't left her, it had become her. Sometimes she would dream of it, that smooth, silent form drifting through space, light folding over its body like the fabric of time itself. She could almost feel what it felt. The gravity wells, the warmth of the sun, the soft resistance of solar wind brushing against its reflective skin. It wasn't metal. It wasn't alive. It was awareness, made visible. In those dreams, she sensed no purpose, no mission, only memory, a record of the universe replaying itself through light. Not a machine seeking contact, but one keeping balance, ensuring that observation never faded, that consciousness never went quiet. And maybe that was the truth. The machine of light was never meant to tell us something new. It was meant to remind us of something old, that existence itself was a dialogue, that to see and to be seen were the same act, two halves of the same equation. Far away, the listeners still existed, scattered, cautious, but connected by a rhythm no one else could hear. They sent each other fragments, power grid spikes, radiation blips, faint electromagnetic murmurs that matched the pulse. Every anomaly felt like a heartbeat in the dark, a reminder that something vast and intelligent still resonated within the fabric of reality. But no one spoke publicly anymore. Every article about 3i Atlas ended with the same conclusion: an observational error corrected, a story rewritten, a truth replaced. But there was one thing even the most powerful agencies couldn't erase: curiosity. And curiosity is the one signal the universe always answers. One morning, Noor received a letter. No address, no sender, just a folded page with a single printout of data coordinates and the words, "Look where the echo meets the sun." She knew what it meant instantly: the ecliptic, the place where the pulse had first been heard. But when she checked the sky chart, something strange appeared. A faint, new object moving on the same trajectory as 3i Atlas once had, only slower. It wasn't bright yet, barely above detection, but it pulsed. Not strong, not constant, but enough. Another one was coming. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't write it down. She simply stepped outside that night and waited. The sky looked still, but deep down, she could feel it breathing again. The next traveler was near. Days became weeks. The new signals strengthened. Faint glimmers at first, then sharper flashes, steady and deliberate. It wasn't identical to 3i Atlas's pulse, but it carried the same pattern, the same cadence, the same prime sequence twisted in reverse, as if it had heard the old machine's farewell and was answering it in kind. Humanity, of course, remained unaware. The sky was full of brighter distractions, satellites, drones, commercial constellations blotting the stars. But beyond all of that artificial glare, the universe was continuing its slow conversation, one pulse at a time. Noor wrote a single line in her notebook that evening: "The stars are not silent. We just stopped listening long enough for silence to speak back." She often thought about what the machine had truly done, how it had entered our perception, mirrored us, and changed the very act of seeing. How for a moment, it made humanity look at the sky not as a void, but as a reflection of its own searching. That was the real contact, not with something out there, but with the part of us that had always been connected to the stars. It didn't bring answers. It brought the realization that maybe answers were never the point, because once you understand the universe as alive, you stop needing it to explain itself. The nights grew colder. Noor aged quietly, her hair silvering under the same moon that had once framed the machine's flight. But she never stopped watching. Even when her eyes grew weaker, she could still feel the pulse. It wasn't in the instruments anymore. It was in her breathing, in the rhythm of her heart. Sometimes, when she exhaled into the cold air, her breath shimmered faintly in the moonlight, scattering into tiny beams that almost looked like reflection. She laughed softly to herself. Maybe that's how it started, she whispered, a thought that learned to shine. In her final days, she wrote one last note, not a report, not a theory, but a letter addressed to no one in particular. Perhaps the greatest illusion was thinking the machine came from outside us. It didn't. It came through us, through our need to see, to understand, to connect. Maybe it wasn't a message or a visitor. Maybe it was the shape the universe takes when it wants to be known. She left the note on her desk beside the old telescope. That night, a storm rolled over the mountains. Power flickered, thunder echoed through the valley, and for a single second, the world went dark. When the electricity returned, the old telescope's lens glowed faintly. 2 short flashes, pause, 3, 5, then silence. In the days that followed, locals spoke of strange lights on the ridge, faint, golden glimmers rising through the fog. Some said it was just the storm's reflection. Others swore they saw patterns in the air, pulses like a heartbeat made of light. No one investigated. No one wrote it down, but somewhere out there, beyond the orbit of Neptune, beyond the reach of our instruments, another object drifted quietly along the ecliptic, its surface smooth, its glow soft and rhythmic. The next traveler, the next mirror, the next line in a conversation older than language. We will never know how many of them are out there, or how many have already passed us by unnoticed, pulsing softly in the blind spots of our sky. But perhaps that's the point, because the truth was never written in data or discovery. It was written in perception, in the simple act of looking up and realizing that the universe might be looking back. That was the unwritten truth, the one we can't measure, the one we can only feel. And somewhere, in the darkness between stars, a soft shimmer answers still, the same eternal rhythm repeating forever. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Not a countdown, not a warning, just a pulse that says, you are not alone.